Hey there, I'm Abby J. Goertzen, and welcome to the podcast for dreamers, weavers, and believers in a better tomorrow. Join me as I sit down with the founders who are reshaping our future and making a difference. This is Regen Society. My name is Abby J. Goertzen, and this is Regen Society podcast. This is my personal offering to the world after many years of diving deep into understanding what it would take to build a more regenerative culture and society, and also all the ways that intentional community, permaculture, holistic design, and elements such as these can weave in together to create a new paradigm on Earth. A lot of people are talking about this right now. A lot of people have their own individual lens and framework to understand these kinds of things. So I'm just bringing in my little aspect of this. And this podcast is really dedicated to uplifting and platforming community leaders, artistic visionaries, people that have seen a different way, an alternative, and brought it to the forefront. That's really my brand. My personal brand is Alternative Abby. And that's really about how can we create alternative systems of education, alternative governance structures, alternative organizational frameworks, alternative corporation frameworks, so that we have ways to actually embody and live the values that we profess to believe in. I think one of the main problems in the world right now that we're seeing with all these crises that are coming up, and our governments are scrambling to interact and dialogue with the cultural conversations that are coming to the forefront, we're really lacking an understanding of what are our values. For so long, civilization has functioned primarily in complete slavery to overlords and to leaders that basically just advanced their egoic personal will at the cost of everything else. And this created so many wars and so many problems and so much oppression and cruelty in the world. And now we're coming into an age where we understand democracy. We understand that our governments and our leaders should be a reflection of what the people actually want, but we don't yet have systems that fully implement this. Our idea of democracy is, I think, in its infancy, really, and the systems that we've created thus far are a step in the right direction compared to feudalism or the way of the world in the past, but they're not actually fully bringing forward what we're coming to understand is necessary. And it's not nice to have at this point with the state of the world and the ecosystems and just the instability of it all. We're realizing that we need systems that actually reflect what the people want. And first, as individuals and as human beings, we need to decide what we value so that we can move from polarizing conversations and move towards productive and cooperative conversations. And I think this is a fundamental shift that we're in as a culture. And when I'm talking about culture, culture is usually very country specific. I'm talking about the globalized world that we live in now. I really see it as we're creating more of a homogenized one culture to rule them all kind of thing. And that doesn't necessarily have to be scary or bad. A lot of people are afraid of the New World Order, and they're afraid of these technocratic systems coming in and really minimizing individual freedoms and liberties. And I think that that's one way to look at it, and you can be afraid of the future. The way that I look at it is really creating a global culture that promotes peace, that promotes fairness, that promotes care. And I think the clearer we get on our values as a society, the more clearly that picture of what's possible can begin to form. So that's really the intention and the vision behind Regen Society. This podcast is trying to weave together these ideas and just promoting more of these conversations. I'm quite a spiritual person, and I find the people that are talking the most about these kinds of things are very spiritual people, but I think those very spiritual people tend to lose others who aren't that spiritually inclined with their wording and with their kind of fantastical view of the world. And although I consider myself very spiritual and that's a huge aspect of my life, my impact in the world, I don't try to create more of a spiritual impact. I think the spiritual is a byproduct of everything. So no matter what you do in the physical world, there's a spiritual element. But I'm really interested in like concrete, actionable things that we can do, systems that we can create, and processes that allow us to take our values and take our visions into the real world and start to test and modify and improve these understandings. So, I am not the most intellectual person. I'm not the most educated person. I'm just very interested and very passionate. So anything that I say in this podcast, feel free to fact check me. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because I definitely don't want to be saying anything that's not true. And I'm going to do my best to do that as well. But I think that's part of what we're trying to create. We're trying to co-create something new in the future, and it has to have elements of science, and it has to have elements of faith, and it has to weave all these things together so that we as a society and as a human culture on Earth are able to coordinate and ensure that the decisions that are being made at the highest levels of government and organizations and institutions are in alignment with what we actually want to be seeing more of in the world. So that's a little bit about the intention behind this podcast. I hope I've gripped your attention. I hope that you're interested to learn more. If this is enough for you and you're happy to just understand this is what you're in for, if you're going to listen to more episodes, then go ahead and click to the next episode and check out my first interview. But for the rest of you who want to understand a little bit more about me as your host, as the creator of this podcast, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and how I got here, so you can have some context for how these conversations are coming to light. So I grew up in Fort McMurray, Alberta, which, if you are not familiar with it, it's an oil town in northern Alberta. And it was really strange to grow up in that environment. It's very full of conservative people. My parents were very conservative, so it tends to attract the kind of people who believe, work hard, make a lot of money, build a beautiful life for yourself, screw everyone else, like that kind of mentality. So it was really strange growing up in that environment and having completely conservative parents, having most of my friend groups be largely conservative types of people, Christians and things like that. And growing up there, I felt really out of place as a hippie. I felt really sad about the way that people would treat the earth like it was just a commodity to be plundered. There was very little respect for the earth as an entity, as a being with consciousness and sentience, and an element of ourselves that we're interacting with in the physical world. We came from the body of Mother Earth, and to Mother Earth we will return, except in our lives we tend to kind of think of the earth and nature as being separate from us. And so when we have these conversations about like saving the earth and climate change and like really reframing that to understand that like we're not actually trying to save the earth, because the earth is going to be completely fine no matter what. We're trying to save humanity from dying and basically snuffing itself out, because that's the situation we're in. Because we've been so out of alignment with the natural flow of the earth and how it actually works, we're getting to the point where the earth isn't going to be able to regenerate as quickly as we're destroying it. So the earth is going to be fine when human beings are wiped out. Actually, it'll probably benefit when human beings are wiped out. But I believe there's a way that human beings could thrive with the earth, but it takes a fundamental shift in the way that we view the earth, the way that we view ourselves, what we value as a culture, and ultimately the actions that we take in the next 20, 30, 50 years. In my lifetime, this shift is either going to happen or it's not. And either way, my spirit is going to move on and I'll have another adventure after this. It's not the end of my world necessarily, but it would be the end of a world. And I think that would be a travesty. I think that we have the tools and resources and information that we need to make a better shift. and we're just lacking the clear, defined objectives and systems to support those objectives. So, yeah, I really saw around me a lot of people who were very unfulfilled and living entirely for the pursuit of more and more and more money. Like in Fort McMurray, there was a lot of financial abundance, especially at the time. They were experiencing quite a boom when I moved there and throughout the large part of my time there. But near the end, when I was getting closer to my 20s, um, it definitely started to experience a decline. So you saw the boom and bust really within a life cycle happen quite quickly in Fort McMurray. Um, so I felt very lost living there. I felt very isolated. I felt like the earth was crying out to me, and I was trying to learn how to listen. I also went through a period of being like intensely Christian, Bible thumper, everyone's got to be converted kind of energy. And throughout my process of growth and starting to question my own belief systems, I ended up coming to the conclusion that Christianity actually doesn't make sense for me. And so I completely left that paradigm and that way of thinking in favor of something that aligned more fully with how I felt in my heart. I felt like the earth is a very important part of spirituality and myself and the world. And so the fact that Christianity didn't seem to honor and really prioritize healing the earth and taking care of the earth and giving back and taking only as much as you need and all those like indigenous principles. I just felt like that was really lacking. It felt to me like Christianity was like a religion from the neck up. It was really about being in your head and like thinking about what's right and wrong and where you're going to go when you die and judgment and these kinds of really mental things, but there was almost zero like somatic practices working with the trauma that's stored within the body, working with our relationship with the earth as a reflection of our relationship with our body. And there's like a lot of gaps there that I really saw, not just in my family unit, but in lots of people that I knew. I just felt like they weren't able to really heal certain parts of themselves because within Christianity, those weren't really mentioned. So it was kind of just left out and is difficult for them to heal when their only frame of reference for understanding the world and the universe is this old school, 2,000-year-old kind of structure for understanding the world. Things have changed a lot in the last 2,000 years. So I think if you're really attached to a belief system from the past, I think that's fine, but there needs to be ways that it can continue to grow. And so I started experimenting with psychedelics when I was in high school and marijuana as well. And that was really an opening point when I was able to finally understand and see the perspectives that I had been insulated from in my very like sheltered Christian upbringing. I went to Christian schools, I went to church, I had Christian friends, and there's like, listen to Christian artists and, Adventures in Odyssey, focus on the family, like read Christian books by Christian authors. Like it's a whole universe. And once you step out of that and you start to realize there's a lot of ideas that aren't present in that universe that I was really searching for. I wanted to heal my relationship with myself. I wanted to become less judgmental. I wanted to love my body. I was really struggling with like body dysmorphia, and I still struggle with that today, but it's gotten so much better. But a lot of issues that, like, for me at least, Christianity could not address. I know lots of people love Christianity and it's been super helpful for them, and like more power to you. For me, Christianity, conservative worldview, like all those things I kind of had to leave behind because they weren't really serving the person that I was becoming, and they weren't helping me sort out the problems that I was struggling with. So yeah, I was experimenting with some psychedelics, and then I started going to some music festivals. I went to Astral Harvest, I went to Rainbow Fiddle, I went to Sangha and festivals like that in Alberta that I really loved. But there was one that really spoke to me and changed me in a fundamental way. That festival is called Intention Alberta. It's run by Architribe, which is a community organization that functions in Edmonton. And they run this festival every year for the past like 16 years, I think. And what really struck me about this festival, like I walked in and I didn't know what to expect. I was just like a hippie that hadn't quite figured out who I was. And I walked in and I felt so accepted by everyone there. I felt so seen. The workshops they had a hug from the heart, a static dance, how to like move in your body and feel what your body wants to do and not think about what it looks like or how others are going to perceive you. Had a hug from the heart, like how to like spend some time holding someone and breathing and really feeling their heartbeat and feeling their energy and experiencing that union of your energies for that moment. Like really slowing down and taking the time to be conscious of these little things. I found it intensely transformative for me. And by the end of that 5 day experience over New Year's, was in the winter, um, I felt more connected and more seen than I had in my entire life. And I realized that's why I was struggling. That's why I was starving for connection. That's why I was so mentally unhealthy, is because I was surrounded by people that were completely cut off from that heart consciousness. And being around people for just those 5 days in that kind of container completely transformed what I thought was possible. After that, I was blown away. I also had an experience of going to Astral Harvest and doing a Joygasm, which was like an energy sharing workshop led by Elena Harder. And that just blew my mind to feel so connected. And like that high lasted for a week, just being so in tune with all these other people and to feel this energy circulating. And after those two experiences, I was just like, I had to completely reformat my understanding of reality, because up until that point, everything that I had come to understand about the world didn't fit anymore. And that was a difficult process, but I'm so glad that I did it, because, just because you grew up with something and you were told it your entire life doesn't mean that it's true necessarily. And even if it is true for them, it doesn't mean that it's going to be true for you or that it's going to serve you and your highest purpose. So that was really the turning point for me. And that's when I started to look into intentional community and being really interested in, what are these spaces of belonging that we can intentionally create for each other when we live in a world that's so driven by your image and by your income. And there's so many things that, like these transactional approaches to reality, if the only way that you interact with other people in your life is you go to a grocery store or some sort of thing like that, and it's all transactional, it's all, you give me this and I'll give you that. And to be in an environment that just felt open and free, and people were just freely giving and freely receiving, and it wasn't like 1, 2, 3 transactional approach, really transformed my idea of like what was possible for humanity. So after that, I was really interested in intentional communities. I started researching the eco villages in Canada and started to get really excited about going to visit some eco villages, some eco communities, and experience more of this in action in a more long-term way rather than just a short festival, to see what it looks like when people live this way day in and day out. And so I ended up buying a minivan, converting it into a camper, and living many hippies' dream, living out of a camper van, traveling through BC. First, I stayed at a community called West Bank Harvest in Kelowna. And then the next summer, I stayed at a community called Forest Gardens in Salt Spring Island. And both of those experiences really expanded for me my understanding of community and also the challenges that come with that way of life. It's not easy. And I haven't seen a single community founder not like constantly pulling their hair out, because they're trying to create something completely new in an environment that isn't really conducive to those things. It's really difficult for a lot of reasons. And I got really inspired and excited. And I thought, like, I need to find a way to help these communities get more established, not just these ones, but all communities. So I ended up creating Kittykat Media, which is a social media marketing agency for social impact businesses and brands and corporations. And the impulse behind this was really like, how do we get our vision out to the world, but in a way that's actually alignment with our values and actually focused on creating real connection rather than creating like viral content or doing like scarcity marketing. I was really interested in like, how do you create content that feels good for your brand? There's a lot of marketing agencies out there, and they know how to make content that performs well, but it's not actually creating a positive impact in the world. And I think, especially for social impact brands who are actively trying to make the world a better place, you need to have a marketing agency that actually understands that impulse and understands why that's important and is able to embody that in the way that they operate and in the content that they ultimately produce. Um, I'm a really big believer in authenticity and transparency. So when your values are able to align with your branding, then you actually create that lasting impact with your audience, and you can create like super fans, like people who are so obsessed with your work because you're able to speak to them at their core level and understanding like what they actually need and what you're actually providing for them. And once you fit that like a glove, you are able to create this really deep connection with people through social media content. So that's kind of my passion now is, I really think that social media is the future. And, I love the quote, the revolution won't be televised, but it will be on social media. And I think we've seen it especially from platforms like Instagram, but also definitely TikTok. There's a lot of decentralization of information and therefore a lot more freedom and a lot more truth. When you can architect what information everybody receives, how they receive it, what bias is embedded within that information, then you have a really good ability to control the population and the way that they think and the types of leaders they're willing to elect and the types of laws they're able to pass. But when you have an opportunity for decentralized information that's coming from individual sources where they can just like turn on their phone, record a video, and there's no barrier to entry, then all of a sudden the world opens up. And instead of the narrative that's being pushed by the mainstream media, you get to see every person's experience of this and every person's opinion, and you get to make that decision for yourself, what you think is more accurate and more true. And I think because we have this kind of environment now, it's forcing our political leaders to step up in a way they've never had to step up before because they can't hide. The internet remembers everything they've ever done. They can't manipulate us because they're literally getting fact checked during their debates. And it's going to be a lot harder for them to maintain control over the population. And I am so excited for this new phase where people are waking up and actually starting to demand more of their governments and expect more also from corporations. You can't just make profit and that's it. You have to actually make the world better. You have to actually benefit the world. Otherwise, why do you exist? And a lot of the problems that we're facing in the world, in my opinion, come down to like the root issue, which is like fundamentally we're disconnected as a culture. And so we're not able to hold these things accountable. We're not able to hold our leaders accountable, hold our businesses accountable, and have something that we can look back on and say, like, this is how we expect you to operate. If you want to make money and do your thing and benefit, you need to benefit the social fabric that you're embedded in. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm not going to go into that a lot right now. But the main thing that I just want to focus on for this is where we're going as a culture. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we were stuck in feudalism for a really long time. And so we were very disempowered. We were literally just slaves. Ironically, we apparently had a lot more free time. But at the end of the day, we were basically existing just to benefit the lords and the queens that we were owned by. And what's interesting is that the transition from feudalism to capitalism actually created more empowerment at the beginning. What spurred that transition, which I learned recently, which is fascinating, was actually the Black Plague. So even though this horrible thing happened and it wiped out so many people and it was just grotesque on so many levels, a lot of negative. But it did have a few silver linings. And one of those silver linings is that there was less people in the world. And so it was harder for the elites and the queens and the powers that be to exploit those people because they needed them even more than they needed them before because there were so few people. So it gave the common man more of a leg up and more of an ability to demand their rights. And so capitalism was a growing idea and it was kind of birthed. And it did create a lot more autonomy for people at the beginning. Now you can have a business and you can make the profit yourself and you just give a tax. So in a way, it's still very similar. Like we're still very much enslaved by whatever country that we're owned by as citizens, but it was better than feudalism. So good job, everyone. Like you improved even just that much, and it made a really positive difference. And so as that swept the world, now we have an entire world that can speak the same language. We all can speak the language of money. I can send, you know, money to someone on the other end of the globe in a completely different city, a completely different country, and they can translate that into goods and services that they need locally. So this is a really cool invention that we've created. The problem is that human beings love to hoard things. Nature doesn't allow you to hoard. Charles Eisenstein has a book called Sacred Economics, and he, in that book, outlines a few alternative economic systems and structures that we could test drive that would create a better flow that doesn't allow so much hoarding. And one of those is depreciating currency. So you get money, but then you have to spend it or you have to loan it in order for it to retain its value. If you just hang on to it, it actually decays. And the reason he said this is that everything in nature decays. You can't hoard a bunch of wheat because it will rot. You have to sell it. It has to be in motion and flow. And I would totally agree that that's one of the major problems we have in our economy right now is that people are able to hoard enormous amounts of wealth, and therefore there's a lot less wealth that's actually within circulation. And so everything costs more because we're operating with this fundamental scarcity. Every time we bring money into the world, it comes at a debt. And so any amount of money that can be created, it creates equal/more debt. So we have this debt-based system that's just constantly creating these big balloons of debt, but we're not able to create abundance with that debt. It's always going to be more chains, more shackles to the banks, to whoever that money has come from. So yeah, there's a growing movement in the world to create more beautiful things, but those movements are also going to be targeted because anything that flows against the norm is a threat to the systems that currently exist. So I'm reading a book right now called Post-Capitalism, and it's really outlining all of the different times that change tried to come through and it was handicapped by the big systems that be. So this podcast is really like a love letter to all the regenerators and all the people that are trying to make a positive difference in the world, going against the grain. And even though you might not see the benefit of your work in your lifetime, it's still so vital and important because what else could we be doing with our time? Really, like the world is on fire and we're just focused on making as much money as we possibly can, or having the fanciest car that we possibly can, or going on the most vacations, like having the biggest butt. Like this is really how we're spending a lot of our time. It's very egocentric and very like self-focused. And I'm really interested in the people that are broadening that and saying, you know what, it's not about me. How can I serve? How can I serve the growth that's happening? How can I serve the regenerative wave of culture that's happening now? How can I be a part of the solution instead of just pointing at the problem? So that's really the intention behind this. I'm so glad if you stuck around for this, and I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey. I've never hosted a podcast before. It's going to be a lot of learning, but I love social media. So, hey, I'm going to put this on social media and see what happens. This podcast is really fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's a space for me because of the work that I do in social media content and everything. I spend most of my time bringing my clients' visions to life, bringing their brand voice to life, bringing their ideas to the forefront of their audience and making that impact. But to have a space where I get to share the whole spectrum of things that I'm really passionate about and also platforming people that have inspired me personally, whether they're in my local community or across the world digitally. That's what I'm really excited about. Thank you so much for listening. Really grateful that you're joining me here, and definitely look for the next episode when it is live. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram at Alternative Abby, or for this podcast, Regen Society. And stay in touch. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Let me know what episodes that you want to see, if there's certain creators that you want me to platform. This first season is going to be exclusively people who live in Calgary and do in-person interviews with them, because there's just so many amazing people here. I'm really excited to just showcase them and let people see more of their work. And after that, the next season will be more open to the whole world. So stay tuned for that, and hope you have a beautiful day.